I mean, I was a young kid. Therefore, I mean, it still wasn't an excuse, for my actions. I mean, I took full responsibility. At the end of the day, like I told you, I can't take it back. And, I mean, there's nothing I could do from here on besides learn from what happened. Like I said, I won't keep dwelling on it. Of course, it's always going to be in the back of my mind, but I'm not just going to keep talking about it. That's just not me.
That was Joe Mixon sitting down with our Dan Graziano following his pro day. Mixon was suspended for the 2014 season after he punched a woman and broke bones in her face and was not invited to the NFL Combine. Mixon's agent told ESPN that he's talked with at least a dozen NFL teams and that he really impressed at his pro day yesterday. Stephen A., do you have a problem with teams talking with Mixon?
Well, I don't have a problem with them talking to him. I mean, he's eligible for the NFL draft, and obviously he's somebody that they're considering. He's a big-time talent, ran for over 1,200 yards last year after getting suspended for the entire year the season before. What I had a problem with is him basically talking about he's not going to talk about X, Y, and Z. I can understand his attitude, but he doesn't get to dictate in terms of how people are going to communicate with him and how they're going to look at him and why. And one of the things that you have to do as you grow and elevate yourself into manhood is not just accept culpability for what you did, but own it and own the repercussions that emanate from it. I'll give you an example. Michael Vick with the whole dogfighting scandal. One of the reasons why Michael Vick can come on a show today and it's not even brought up is because after serving his time in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, he comes out and he never shied away from it. He spoke in public. He gave interviews. He, represented the Humane Society and what their objectives and agendas were. He made sure to make it a point that he wasn't running or shying away from his flagrant transgressions, because he not only wanted the world to know that he had learned from his mistakes and his errors, but he also wanted to shine a light and a spotlight on the fact that he was going to do everything he could to make sure not only that he never repeated his mistake, but that he would do whatever he could to dissuade others from making the same mistake that he did. Maybe it's asking too much for Mixon to do that as he's getting ready to graduate to the NFL. But I think it's something that he should consider, because if you do that, then you're not a person just trying to get away with what you did so you can get to the NFL. You're a person that really recognizes the error of your ways and want to make sure you, in assistance towards others as well, make sure something like that can never happen again.
Yeah, it feels like he's gotten some bad advice from someone. That's what it just reads like to me. Hey, put this in the past. That's what people love to do when they just don't want to deal with it anymore. I've addressed it, now I'm going to put it in the past and refuse to address it. I agree with you, Stephen A., about Michael Vick. That is precisely how you deal with a scandal like that, and in his case, prison time. He seemed to, or he demonstrated to me at least, and to many others, that he internalized the lessons. He wasn't simply paying lip service to the idea, but it had changed him. He had changed. He'd worked to change and then worked to affect change and never hid from it. And I don't know if that's the advice he was getting, but that's what he did. It seemed authentic. And you're right, he's been able to, in many respects, move past it as a result, at least in terms of the damage it does to him on a daily basis. Mixon, if he adopts this attitude, maybe not as much. I think he has if the NFL's saying, okay, you can play, then he should be assessed. He should be evaluated physically and in terms of his behavior off the field. And you add it all up and you see what happens. Now, this will also depend on teams' positions about domestic violence and how they want to be viewed. And what we've seen, I think, mostly from NFL teams is not a ton of moral courage in these cases for those who feel that this is a moral issue even at this point, and wouldn't want him on the roster. But they are sensitive to bad press. And so it depends, I think, partly on how this stuff is covered. And I think it will certainly suppress his draft status. The question is by how much. Mel Kiper said yesterday, second round. That's shocking to me. Because I know he's talented, but I've seen him as low as the 4th or 5th running back in this draft. And running back is not the position it once was. And I thought it would affect him by 3 or 4 rounds of draft status, and I thought maybe he's a 3rd or 4th round pick, which would mean an undrafted free agent. But apparently he is talented enough and maybe the teams feel there is not sufficient bad press that he might go as high as the second round.
Yeah, concerning the clip we just saw and how Mixon is handling this, as far as publicity and public relations is concerned, I totally agree with both of you. But I want to set that part aside and address what you were getting on there at the end, Max. Do you have a problem with teams interviewing Mixon? Not only do I not have a problem, I think teams should definitely be interviewing and interacting with Joe Mixon. What each individual franchise has to decide is basically two things: where you stand on a moral issue, on where you stand on second chances, where you stand on looking some human being in the eye and deciding what kind of character he has, what kind of person he has, whether or not he's redeemable, and that can only be answered individually and honestly face to face. And second, more cold-heartedly, brand, as you said there, Max. Do teams want to take on this sort of public relations branding of employing Joe Mixon? But, if a team took Joe Mixon off their board right now, with no more information they already have, I honestly couldn't take huge exception to that. I've been on this program several times, and I have argued that someone should not be convicted without overwhelming evidence. We should ask ourselves what the standard of proof on these kinds of things are. That someone should not be barred from employment after they've served their suspension or been exonerated, one or the other. But with Joe Mixon, you have information, and none of those big blunt instruments like conviction or barring employment are really part of the equation. It's only a question of whether or not your team that you own or you run wants to be in business with this one individual. And if you said, I have enough right now, if I have enough right now to know the answer is no, I can't look at you and tell you you're wrong. But what I can tell you is this: if I'm running a franchise and I want to arrive at that conclusion or the other, I need to talk to Joe Mixon. I need to look into his eyes.
Yes,
I need to know what kind of human being he is.
And he should be evaluated not only for his physical prowess on the field, but all that stuff. And you can only do that by taking a look and talking to him. I agree with you there. Here's the issue with Joe Mixon, though. It's not just the idea of a conviction or not a conviction, knowledge of what he did definitely or not. It's the presence of video, and which will live forever on the internet and on social media. And so, rightly or wrongly, that will, and there's a strong argument for rightly, that will affect him. Because unless he's an absolute difference maker on the field, I mean, if he was interchangeable with just everybody else, he was a replacement level back, he wouldn't be drafted. But apparently he does, in fact, have special NFL level talent, special even for the NFL, enough to be drafted in the second round, even with the presence of this video. And that's what strikes me here, guys. It's the way the human brain is wired. We can hear of a bad thing someone did. It's in the abstract. But if we see it, we react differently to it. And everyone has seen that video, and it is terrible, and it's never going away.
Yeah, and I just wanted... I'm sorry, Stephen, go ahead.
Go ahead. No. I'm just saying we all need to put on our big boy pants in this regard. The visual, we got eyes for a reason. And the visual, even though it shouldn't be, the visual is far more impactful. But the reason why that resonates with those in decision-making positions is because it ultimately will affect their bottom line more profoundly. If you're the National Football League, you have read and heard about numerous transgressions throughout the decades from a bevy of NFL players. It didn't affect their bottom line the way Ray Rice did. Okay? And obviously because the Ray Rice video happened, all of a sudden reading about what Greg Hardy did, reading about Adrian Peterson and what he got into in terms of his child and, corporal punishment and stuff like that. All of a sudden it resonated far more profoundly. But what made the Minnesota Vikings make a move in order to get, Adrian Peterson ultimately on the commissioner's list? What happened was sponsors and advertisers were threatening to pull their support. And so that's what we're paying attention to here. It's not just about looking at the individual teams. It's about the residue of those who finance and supplement their income and revenue saying, we're going to pull our support away from you. And that always speaks profoundly.
Yeah, and I just think it's important to draw lines between whether or not someone should go to jail, and I know you guys are, whether or not someone should go to jail, whether or not someone should be barred from employment, whether or not somebody should be suspended, and whether or not somebody should be employed by your individual company. And each one of those has different standards and different proofs. And the further you go along that scale, the more the equation becomes subjective and internal. And each team has to ask questions of themselves. And once you get to the end, once you get to that last equation, you need to know Joe Mixon. You need to meet him. You need to talk to him. You need to look into his eyes.
Well, thank you. And on that
You're right.
note, I just want to point out we need to get to a point with domestic violence where we're past the visual, because I can paint a pretty vivid picture through a police report as well. Clearly not there yet, but that needs to happen.